Alright, this is going to be 4.4, adding and subtracting rational expressions. We've just gotten done with multiplying and dividing them, so naturally we need to talk about how to add and subtract them. Before we talk about doing that with variables, let's just do a quick review over adding fractions in general. So, main point with adding and subtracting rational expressions, adding and subtracting fractions, the main key is going to be, do you have a common denominator? Alright, that's pretty much the number one thing you have to care about for this. For example, if I ask you to take 1/5 plus 2/5, because both of these fractions have a denominator of 5, that allows us to go ahead and add these. Remember, when you're actually adding or subtracting fractions, you only change the numerators, right? I'm not taking 5 plus 5 to make it over 10. My answer is going to be over 5 still. The only part that's actually being added are the numerators, meaning 1 plus 2 gives me 3. Alright, so if I'm taking 1/5 plus 2/5, the first thing I do is check the denominator. Since the denominator is the same, that means I'm even allowed to add them in the first place. Once I recognize I'm allowed to add them, I just combine the numerators. Okay? These rules still apply even if we put variables in there. Meaning, if I ask you to take 1 over x plus 5 plus 2 over x plus 5, well, we can clearly see that both of those fractions have the same denominator as a quantity of x plus 5. Since they have the same denominator, that means I will be able to go ahead and add these. Just like any other time adding fractions, I'm not going to be changing the denominator. It's going to stay x plus 5. The numerators is what I'm going to combine, so 1 plus 2 would give me 3. And that would be my answer. That's base concept for adding and subtracting fractions. Okay? I guess we should probably talk about subtraction as well, since that's a little bit different. So anytime you're doing subtracting, you're going to be guaranteed to be dealing with at least one negative term. Right? Even if we just talk about whole numbers, if I ask you to take 5 minus 2, that is the same thing as me asking you to take 5 plus a negative 2. Right? Anytime you're doing subtraction, you have a negative term. So if we think about negatives as it applies to fractions, if I tell you that you have a negative 1/5, if I'm telling you the entire fraction is negative, remember there's a few different ways you can express this. This would be one of those ways, but you can also choose to attribute that negative to a specific level, either the numerator or the denominator. The key thing to remember is that negative does not go to both the numerator and the denominator, right? I can look at this as a negative 1 over 5, or I can look at this as a positive 1 over a negative 5. Right, either of those is an okay way to express negative 1/5. The key is to remember the negative can't go to both the numerator and the denominator at the same time. So when we're dealing with adding or subtracting fractions, rational expressions, when we subtract, we're going to have to be having at least one negative fraction. Right? For example, if I simply ask you to take 1 over x plus 5 minus 2 over x plus 5. They still have the same denominator, so I'm able to combine them, but they only have the same denominator if I choose to attribute this negative to the numerator, right? Because we just said up here I have two options. I can attribute the negative to the top, or I can attribute the negative to the bottom, one of the two. If I move that negative to the denominator, then they don't have the same common denominator anymore. So anytime you are subtracting anytime you're subtracting the fractions in general, my recommendation would be to always take that negative and attribute it to the top. Attribute it to the numerator. Okay? The way I would show that, personally, if I was asked to do a problem like this, 1 over x plus 5 minus 2 over x plus 5, my first step would be to change this to addition. And I would do that by making this a negative 2, and then that can go back to being addition. right? It's legitimately the same idea as when I'd said that 5 minus 2 is the same thing as 5 plus a negative 2. What I'm saying is 1 over x plus 5 minus 2 over x plus 5 is the same thing as 1 over x plus 5 plus a negative 2 over x plus 5. You don't have to do that. I'm sure some of you can keep that straight in your mind anyways, but personally my recommendation would be, if you have the opportunity, anytime you're dealing with subtraction, just change that subtraction sign to a positive and move that negative to whatever you have for the numerator. Either way, the answer for this, since we have a common denominator, it's still going to be over x plus 5, and then 1 plus negative 2, or 1 minus 2, would be a negative 1. And that's going to be your answer for this problem. Only other thing to talk about in general with that would be if, let's say, I asked you to do x plus 2 over x minus 5 minus x plus 3 over x minus 5. Actually, let's just do addition first. So let's say I wanted you to add those two fractions, okay? They do certainly have a common denominator of x minus 5, so they are okay to be added together. Don't forget the basic rules of addition that you've already learned. You want to combine like terms. So I see an x in my first numerator, and I see an x in my second numerator. So x plus x would give me 2x. I see a 2 in my first numerator and a 3 in my second numerator. Those are like terms, so 2 plus 3 would give me 5. So the answer to this problem would be 2x plus 5 over x minus 5. Remember, you cannot cancel any of those out because this is a quantity and this is a quantity, so unless they were exactly the same, they wouldn't be able to do any canceling or anything. Okay, so that would be your answer. Now let's do that problem again, but let's do it with subtraction. So like I said before, I don't like looking at this as a subtraction problem because that negative is just sitting out there. I'm worried I might mess up with it later on. So the first thing I want to do is I want to take this negative and I want to attribute it to my numerator so that I can change this back to addition. Now the key here is remembering x plus 3 is a quantity. They're together. So if I'm moving the negative to that numerator, I'm going to have to distribute it to both of these. Meaning, if I want to change this to addition, my first fraction is still x plus 2 over x minus 5. But now I'd be adding to a negative x and a negative 3 over x minus 5. Probably number one mistake made with these types of problems is forgetting if you have multiple terms in the second fraction to make sure that you distribute that negative to everything in your numerator, everything on top. If you remember to do that, the rest of this still isn't that bad. I do have a common denominator, so x minus 5 will still be my bottom, my denominator. I have an x and a negative x this time. Well, x plus negative x would just be 0. Just cancel each other out. So I don't have any x's on top anymore. I have a positive 2 plus a negative 3. 2 plus negative 3 would be negative 1. And so that would be my answer for this problem.